My name is Liliana Sanchez.
I'm Tenzin Choegyal.
I'm Marcela, Cornejo.
My name is Alyas Taqawi.
I consider myself an activist. I'm a cultural educator for moving cultures, moving stories, and I'm really passionate about changing the narrative around what it means to be a new migrant in Australia.
I'm basically a practicing artist who largely express my emotions and stories through music.
I have been working in social and community services sector for as long as I've been in Australia.
My biggest passion is being a social person. I enjoy every time when I meet with different people, different culture, different language, different food.
Hello and welcome. My name's Pia Perversi-Burchall and I'm the co-host of the podcast In My Country. This is a special panel version of In My Country for REIMAGINE. And we're having our conversation today on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, so I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joined today by 4 of the guests from our show. To my right, in order, we have Alyas Taqawi. So Alyas is a youth worker and occasional Uber driver by day, and by night, co-founder and board member of Refugee Voices, a newly founded refugee-led community organisation committed to ensuring that when it comes to the policies, campaigns and decisions that affect refugees, their voices are heard loud and clear. Alyas was born in Afghanistan and arrived in Australia by boat as an asylum seeker in 2010. To Alyas's right is Liliana Maria. Lily is the founder of Moving Cultures, Moving Stories, which delivers cultural engagement, storytelling and training. Lily is an experienced facilitator and performer. She featured in the Watts 2017 and 2018 seasons of the theatre production The Village, appeared as a speaker at the Brisbane Writers' Festival in 2019, and her personal story has been shared on SBS Voices. Lily was born in Chile and arrived in Australia on a humanitarian visa in 1988. With her mother, Marcela Cornejo, who is sitting to Lily's right. Marcela is a passionate activist and advocate. She's a grandmother, a keen gardener and a community worker. As you'll hear more of today, Marcela's early adulthood was spent fighting against the Chilean dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. Since arriving in Australia in 1988, Marcela has never stopped fighting for human rights and has been active with organisations such as Chile Woke Up, Warriors for the Aboriginal Resistance, and various refugee advocacy groups. And last but not least, Tenzin Choegyal. So as you heard in the opening video, Tenzin is a Tibetan artist, composer, activist, musical director, and cultural ambassador. Born to a family of Tibetan nomads, as a child, Tenzin would listen to his mother singing in the nomadic style, and he now channels the wisdom and traditions of his ancestors through his songs. Tenzin has played at such prestigious events as WOMAD, as well as several concerts for Tibet House at Carnegie Hall in New York. He's also founder of Brisbane's annual Festival of Tibet. Tenzin was forced into exile in India with his family as a child and arrived in Australia on a partner visa with his now wife Bronwyn in 1997. Welcome everyone. So we hear a lot about refugees and asylum seekers in the news and in public conversation, but not often do we have an opportunity to hear from the people themselves. So today is a little bit about starting to take steps towards changing that conversation. We're here to listen to 4 people with lived experience, open our minds, open our hearts, and hope to hear and learn something different. To start us off, I'd like to invite each of you to share a little bit about your personal story and in particular about your life before you arrived in Australia. Alyas, we'll start with you. Can you talk us through the social or political circumstances that you were living within and what led you to making the decision to leave and seek refugee protection in Australia?
I actually was born in a war-torn country, Afghanistan, and the situation there was really, really bad. My mother talks of being pregnant with me when she was running away from the airstrikes and the tanks and hiding in the mountains, in the caves. The situation was really bad because of the civil war in Afghanistan and the rise of extremists, Taliban. My family decided to come to Pakistan for a better life. We comparatively had a better life there. We had gas, electricity, and we had schools to go to, and our lifestyle had gotten better in terms of peace and tranquility and also opportunities. The reason for that was also because we had a host community, Hazara community in Pakistan, Quetta.
Can you explain a little bit about the Hazara, who the Hazara people are, for people who are listening who might not?
Hazaras are the third largest ethnic group in Afghanistan. We have Turkish and Mongolian heritage. We speak Hazaragi, which is a dialect of Dari, but also it's classified as different language, having Mongolian and Turkish vocabularies. Hazaras had been the victim of persecution for centuries, and according to our elders' verbal history, we had been persecuted and we were massacred. 65,000 of our population were either displaced or wiped out. And then we, since had been the victim of persecution, there were laws and regulations that had limited opportunities for us in Afghanistan, and we were basically limited to be only cleaners and do the jobs that others did not want to do in Afghanistan. Our people are resilient and very peace-loving as well. So when they were displaced, they settled in other countries really well, and Pakistan, really well, and we had people rising to general levels, chief of army, staff of Pakistan, and we have a lot of people working in the governments, and we were quite good citizens of Pakistan. Hazaras have Shia religion that they practice. Most of them. We have Sunnis as well, and some are atheists too.
So in Pakistan, that's an important detail, isn't it? Because the majority of the country are Sunni Muslim. Hazara people are generally seen to be Shia, and so that places them in the religious minority. But for you, it's a little bit more complex, isn't it? So can you talk in some detail around your particular personal circumstances in that situation and how that led you to feeling unsafe and feeling like you needed to leave?
I was brought up as Shia Muslim as a child, but during my mid-teen, early teens, I started doubting on the indoctrination that was imposed on me individually, and I started kind of distancing myself from the religion that my family practiced, and I became a free thinker. So for me, definitely it was harder, feeling persecuted and discriminated against within my own community, but in a larger picture, we were also persecuted within Pakistani population, being Shia and Hazaras. We have got different feature than the rest of the population in Pakistan. We've got Mongolian and Turkish heritage, so we look very, very Asian and foreign to the locals.
And you found out there was a list, is that right? Can you tell me about the list?
We had a group of friends who were free thinkers, and we were quite comfortable in that group. But it was really uncomfortable for for religious authorities there. And there was a time when I heard some of the friends talking about the extremist groups having a list of targets that they wanted to do, and my name was amongst the list to be one of the free thinkers and an atheist, and it made me really feel unsafe, and the Hazaras generally were being killed by the extremist groups in Pakistan since 2001. Up to now, almost 5,000 Hazaras had been injured, killed, and murdered in those suicide bombings, target killings, and bomb blasts.
And that's what that list was. It was a list of people that were to be identified to be killed.
Yes. Well, yes. Generally, most Hazaras were the target, but within the community, I was the target because of being a free thinker and not religious.
Marcela, can you tell us a little bit, as we've spoken about before, you were an activist in Chile under the Pinochet regime. Can you tell us in some more detail about some of those experiences and what that was like for you as a young woman?
In my particular case, I was a young wife and a young mother, and we were living under the dictatorship regime, Pinochet dictatorship, so we didn't have much opportunity to have a job, education, proper housing. There was no democracy. So for the common people like us, like no even middle class, like little bit less than middle class, we didn't have much chances to get educated or apply for proper housing. So we did get organized, and 3/4 of the Chilean people was getting organized against the dictatorship related to different issues. So in my suburb where I was living, we were organized on a common pot. So because so many people didn't have money to have normal food and eat daily meals or dinners. So one of the organizations I did belong was the Common Pot. So the main aim was to go to the main markets, ask for food donation, and then we were taking that food donations to our church because we had a beautiful priest in that suburb. And we used to cook for everybody, and everybody was coming with the dishes and have food. At least they had one meal, and I had one meal too because my husband was unemployed. So that was one of the organizations, like people's organization, community organization I did belong. The other organization I did belong was People Without House. So we used to do a lot of things, going and protesting to the government, give us the chance to have a proper access to housing, affordable housing for us. So that was the other one. And the other one was my political affiliation, because I did grow up under dictatorship. So with time, I did realize where was my role in that society. And with my partner, my comrade, we did decide to join a political wing. So we were in the very left wing, unfortunately. No, unfortunately, but we did fought very hard against the dictatorship. So that did cost us a lot of things, like 3 years in jail of my husband and comrade. Then later, he had his opportunity to get the freedom, and it did cause us to come in as a refugee. We had like a good things and bad things about the time of the dictatorship. We did grow up in a very violent society as such. Because we were on the front line against the dictatorship, so we took a lot of risk. We were pretty young. We had a lot of adrenaline. So we took a lot of risk, and it had a cost, but we will do it again, all over again.
What were the risks of being active politically in Chile?
In those times, which it doesn't change much what's happening today right now in Chile, you could lose your life on the street, get killed by the police, secret police, get arrested, never know where your destination, get arrested, go to jail as my comrade partner did, and have an unfair trial. So you could be there forever and never get a trial, get disappeared, get arrested and tortured. All the tools a dictatorship will use and implant to stop people ask for democracy.
Yeah.
So.
And so Lily you were born into the middle of this. So it was only a few days before Gonzalo, your husband, Marcela, was arrested that Lily, you were born. What are some of your memories of that period of your early years? How many of your early years were you in Chile, and what do you remember of that time?
Yeah, so as you say, I was born in the middle of that dictatorship, and actually my father was taken 7 days after my birth. And I remember having memories, and not memories, I didn't know they were memories, they were bad dreams of that my family was being taken away. So I don't know if that would be a memory of 7 days, but that was ingrained in my mind. And then memories that I actually had were things that I guess I learned later what they meant. At the time was normal, being fearful of the police or of the military. If they were on the street, it wasn't a safe feeling, it was a run and hide feeling. It was a you are not safe if you see these people in uniform. I remember, Molotov bombs in the street. I remember tear gas bombs actually going into our house, and I remember what I had to do, like duck and hide and cover. I remember these things. I remember being in the childcare centre and knowing that if there was a situation where they would come to this childcare centre, we had to hide. Because it wasn't safe for us to be the children of political activists. I didn't know I was a child of a political activist, but I just knew that our lives were not safe.
Tenzin, your story's taken a little bit of a different path in a sense, because if we go back to the period during which your family was fleeing Tibet, that was during your early childhood, and then you spent quite a long time in India before coming to Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and about those early years?
I was born into a Tibetan nomad family, and so as Lily was talking about being born into an activist family, probably it was in that situation where my family was fleeing the occupation of Tibet from China's communist regime. So I don't remember much of my early toddler life because it was kind of in a turmoil. Probably a lot of my elders around that, like my parents' generation, probably went through a whole lot of trauma because of moving out of the country. So I have joyous memories of actually being on the back of my mom, coming out into Nepal and living in Nepal for about 4 years. And then around that time, my dad passed away. I think he was probably very young. So I don't have much relationship. I didn't have time to find a relationship with my dad. But when he passed away, a lot of Tibetans were facing, because they were just dropped into a different universe from the universe that they knew before. Quite a lot of generation passed away. About 1.2 million Tibetans passed away around that time. The annexation of Tibet started in 1949, and it was completed within 10 years. And in 59 March, the month of March, His Holiness the Dalai Lama fled Tibet into exile in India. So there was a lot of Tibetans who followed him, and that's why my parents also followed, probably in the early 70s. They were living in the southern Tibet as a nomad.
And he was fleeing because of the Chinese government had annexed Tibet.
Yeah.
And
that was during the Cultural Revolution time. And probably you would know, most of you would know what Cultural Revolution did to the Chinese people themselves, not to forget about Tibet. What Mao Zedong did to their own people, like probably the largest amount of human beings been killed during that Cultural Revolution of their own Chinese people. So what would have happened to Tibet at that point, you can imagine in a way. And it was also like probably, I guess I was born into that world of being a refugee. I was like born into it. And so these days when people ask me, who are you? I don't know where to pinpoint who I am. I'm Tenzin Choegyal. Then for like friends like you, a lot of you guys know me as a Tibetan artist. And for my kids, I'm a father. And then many out there, actually, I'm nobody. Like there's many people, they don't even know that I'm a refugee.
That's an interesting point that you make around your identity and being where you're from and feeling unsure about that, and or not feeling like there is a place that you're from, because I think one of the things that perhaps gets a little bit lost when we talk about refugees and asylum seekers in a simple way in the media is that in leaving your country, you're not just leaving a war and going to a safe place, you're also leaving behind a home and a culture and a lot of beautiful things or positive things or things that you actually don't want to let go of necessarily. So I'd be interested to hear from you around what it was like leaving your life behind and then building a new life in Australia. Marcela, can you talk a little bit about that?
That is the kind of touching subject. When we did decide to leave our country, that was, I think, one of the costs we have to go through because we decided to fight against the dictatorship. So my husband did coming out of jail, and he could not do anything in the country. He couldn't get his license. He could not go to work. The secret police was still following him, so he was nobody. Plus, we had the persecution during his 3 years jail. We went through a lot as a family. My family did suffer a lot as well. My mom especially, she was my biggest supporter in every single way. So after a year and struggled so much, tried to survive in Chile and in worse condition than before he went to jail. Because before he went to jail, we were social, we were doing things, we were part of the community, we were part of absolutely a lot of things were moving in the country. And then he got out of jail and I went back home. I didn't do anything. I was kind of traumatized. So many things happening. Gonzalo took off. So many things did happen because we were in different worlds. So we decided, because he got really persecuted, so he didn't have no hope as a person in Chile. And we had these 2 beautiful little children. And we did decide to come and apply for refugee visa. And it was so many feelings. We knew we were coming in a beautiful country. Our expectation was to come in and be free, sleep well, had the chance to have a job, send the children to a school, but more important, just to be safe. So we did left everything behind. And we mean everything, no material thing, like the most important thing, your family, my mom, my grandparents, all my friends, my comrade from my party, all the people on the server. We have to leave everything and put all our work into suitcases. And I didn't realize how hard it was that. After 5 years later, I was in this country. I didn't kind of release what we really done because we came here. I was getting in the airplane with this big smile, and all my family was crying, but I could not hide. I was so happy to get in that airplane. But then when times did pass and I saw my beautiful children grow up without the best person around, grandmother, aunties, uncles. The cost was enormous. So, but we didn't realize that after a few years later, when the how is it described? When the whole Australian life went through, you know what I mean? Because we were so excited. Here was freedom, it was green, it was, everything was nice for us. Because I remember those times in Chile, I used to remember my city a dark city. Everything was dark for me. That was the sensation of my own city. And when I came here, they had flowers, they had trees, they had grass on the floor. People were nice, and I don't have to look at the back who was, you know, or what I was talking. I had the advantage, we just did talk Spanish, so nobody knew what I was talking. But back in Chile, you were in the bus and you have to really watch what you were saying. So a lot of things, yeah.
Lily, what was that like as a young person? Because I think another detail that's important to be aware of is that your family initially came here to Australia. You spent 8 years here, but you always felt that it was going to be temporary and you were going to be going back. And then you went back to Chile and you realised that a lot of things hadn't changed and that didn't work out, and you ended up having to come back to Australia again. So can you tell us a bit about what that was like for you as an adolescent?
Well, I guess as well initially, you know, just going from what my mum was saying, I knew that not growing up with family was a really big deal. I knew that I really missed my grandmother, and because I was really attached to her, and actually I carry her name, and so that was always felt in those 8 years. And I remember being so excited to go back to Chile to see my family, to see my country, to see my culture, because it was a piece of me that I didn't know. It's so hard being next to my mum and having these conversations because we feel it. And so going back to Chile was amazing. I got to see my grandmother, I got to see my family, I got to see my culture, I got to speak my language, I got to have my food. I got to know who I was all over again. And then knowing that I couldn't stay there, that I still couldn't stay there, I couldn't keep it. And then starting all over again as a teenager here in Australia, and then having to, you know, relearn who I was now again in Australia, but as a teenager, and going through that process all over again. But now consciously knowing that your family's back home, and you know, you grew up without your cousins and aunties and uncles and, you know, your neighbors that are also considered your family in most of Latin America, and just kind of having to leave some of that behind, and, you know, take the good bits of, you know, growing up in Australia and somehow mesh them together. And yeah.
So it's quite a process, I imagine, of building a sense of belonging and identity in a new place that probably happens in parts, but I imagine never completely finishes. And part of REIMAGINE is around helping us to foster a sense of a culture in Queensland and Australia around creating welcome and supporting new people here to feel a sense of belonging. And I don't think that has to be just around cultural diversity. I think we're wanting a culture that celebrates diversity in all parts of who we are. So it might be cultural diversity, it might be diversity in gender and sexual identity, religion, whatever that might be. So I'd be really interested to hear from each of you around what it was for you that supported you to start to feel a sense of belonging and that this is a new home. Tenzin.
Before that, I just wanted to add a little story that just brought some memories back from 30 years ago after hearing your story. As I was growing up as a kid, like as a refugee in India, I would go and see my mother every winter from the orphanage that I was living in for 2 months. And all the elders of my mother's generation, they were always, like, we were most of the time living in 8x8. And they were always ready to head back home. They were never, like, they've always packed their boxes under the bed, and like everything was packed, ready to head back home. So yeah, and I, like, occasionally when I am just wandering around in the Brisbane city, and then when I see a box or something, it reminds me of, like, takes me back to that, like, you know, like all the senses, the vision, the taste, the sound, they bring you back, like, all these memories. And yeah, whenever I visited any of her generation, they were always ready to pack. So many of them now, there are, like, not many left now. And most of them, they passed away with their boxes intact in exile. So I don't know where I'm going with this, but it just reminded me of that.
That sense of being caught in between.
Yeah, and you know, like like a lot of these people, like my parents' generation, they lived off a box. And just in hope of heading back home. And for me now, I feel at home here in Australia. So I guess it's more about, once you are in tune with the language, then you feel home, I think. Like after so many years, like only last year I felt that I was in Australia. When I went to...
Can you remind us what year you arrived?
97.
Yes.
And I was at Northern Queensland at Garma Festival. It's an indigenous, all the indigenous people of this land come together over there. And only then I was hearing all these languages being spoken to each other, and I was like, yes, I'm in Australia. Till then, you know, like, I've been living here for 20 years, but like I can converse with anyone in English quite comfortably, languages for communication. So I didn't feel that different of the other being that I was meeting. But at Garma, I felt, yes, and the land was like totally red, and like the spoken, they were like, I was super happy to see that thriving, the young generation of the Australian Aboriginals. They were speaking their language, and I was hearing them, and I was like curious what they must be speaking about. And so then I felt like I did arrive in Australia. So, yeah. And I forgot your other question.
You just answered it, I think.
I add a little bit
Yeah.
to that. Just whatever you've been through with your family in a standby, I call it a standby. Mostly of the Chilean community did flee Chile to Australia. I think we were doing the same like their family. We were all on a standby. We were all waiting for the democracy to come back to Chile so we could go back. And that's the time of Liliana going back to the family and everything. In our case, we never bought a brand new car. We had the most raw car ever. I started with a spoon. We never had anything new. Everything was beautiful second-hand from the second shops because we were on standby as well. No packing boxes, but that feeling was in our mind. As soon the Pinochet goes, we can go back. And it did happen, but that feeling united us somehow, being on standby. We did enjoy the life in Australia for 8 years back in Melbourne, but we never thought we're gonna grow our roots here. So that's very most common. I feel very identified with your family and your relative because we went through that too. And a lot of Chilean people did pass away in exile and never could return. So very, very similar.
Yeah.
Look, identity is funny because it is manipulated internationally at the moment. I mean, in the name of identity, there are a lot of hate speech, a lot of division created. I often think of my family when they had to leave Afghanistan and be forced to come to Pakistan. I actually remember that my father and mother could not speak Urdu in Pakistan, and they felt like they don't belong there anymore. I, as a child, struggled in the first few months, and I adopted. I became one of the locals. And then, lucky that we got exposed to education and learned the language English. And coming to Australia comparatively was easier for me because I knew the language. I was not a conservative. I was open to new changes, and things changed. Now my kids speak English, and they're as Australian as anyone, I guess. Asian-looking Australians, Hazara-looking Australians, but they're Australians. And the journey personally for me in terms of where I belong and what my identity is quite interesting because I wear many hats. As you said, Tenzin, that at home you're a father, you're also a musician. I'm a father, I am a partner, a lover, I'm also a youth worker, I'm also an advocate, Uber driver. Beyond my ethnicity, beyond my journey as a refugee, I'm a person like any other Australians, having similar feelings, similar laughter. We all laugh and I think hurt in the same language. So I actually believe that maybe one day we understand that, as a Greek intellectual says, that the borders internationally is actually scars on the planet, and it has harmed us more than benefiting. It has harmed other animals. I mean, look at the walls created. It has harmed ecosystem of this planet. So for me personally, from Afghanistan to Pakistan to Australia, I remember going back to Pakistan again in 2017, and I kind of did not belong there anymore. I was looking for the same experiences that I had in childhood, and it was not the same. Things move on, you know, things change. I didn't have the same circle of friends anymore. So yeah, I think, and then coming back to Australia and getting out of the airport with my son in my arm, I felt I'm home. So yeah, it's funny. I don't know how to define that, but it's quite interesting. Overall, forced migration to me is actually human right abuse. I mean, people should have the right to choose to migrate anywhere they want. Yep.
I think if the whole notion of refugee is about placing the right human rights to the people that are oppressed, and for, you know, like, you can't really differentiate when there's no language to a smile. Everyone can smile, but then when that smile is abused by a dictatorship or a regime, then I think it's, from my side, I think it's our responsibility to speak out for the people that, like, because I've grown up as a voiceless person in a way, especially for my parents' generation. They really wanted to go back home. So for their sake, and the people who are living right now under Chinese regime within Tibet, for me, I have the most actually, like, I do have, to a degree, I do have the rights to speak out my mind. But for those beings who are left back in Tibet, and then also I really want to, like, from my side, as much as possible, about this planet as well. When you call home, when you define home, I think we define ourselves to a very limited space, like a tiny little space, and then we call that home, and then not care about the whole larger ecosystem that is actually our home. So that is being destroyed. When we are talking about human rights, actually the violators are destroying our home, not only home in Afghanistan, home in Chile. It's actually the whole, it's all interdependent. And something that gets destroyed up in the Himalayan ranges, the effect of it is actually downstream. You know, like in Bangladesh, India, Vietnam, even in China, the downstreams. So it's all, I guess, yeah, connected. Yeah, interdependent. We are all somehow the planet has aligned us to be sitting here to talk about it.
Lily?
Yeah, I really loved what you both added to that. I absolutely loved how you said that borders are the scars of the world, because when people ask me here in Australia where I'm from, I will always get asked where I'm from. I've lived here most of my life. I've grown up here. People who listen to me without looking at what I look like will say, "You sound Aussie," right? And so then you get, you know, these questions of where am I from? What is my identity? And I have now always said, well, I'm a citizen of the world. For me, the borders that cause scars on our planet don't exist because I just belong to this world. And that's, I think, what my family's experience and being part of this, you know, changing and kind of juggling of cultures and countries has taught me that what you sort of have been saying about that we're all part of this collective, this community of the world, and that includes everything in the world.
And then collectiveness, if we only think about my own community and, you know, like only voice about my country, I think it's not enough. No, but it helps to protect the wholesomeness of but you need to also raise the issues that are on the so-called home that we call now Australia. Issues that are, you know, like when you go and outback, the Aboriginal brothers and sisters are actually living outside of their, like living as a refugee in their own home, in a way. So I think we need to raise that issue as well, much as we raise our own issues as well.
I think we started very narrow this afternoon in terms of a conversation around your refugee experiences in particular, and we've broadened right out to a really rich conversation around basically what it means to be human. And I'd like to bring it back down again now and kind of place this conversation in the context of probably the broader public conversation around refugees and people seeking asylum. And I'm thinking in particular about some of the specific language that's often used in those contexts. So things like boat people, queue jumpers, there can even be connotations of terrorism sometimes, and then at the other end of the scale, these ideas of victims of either cruel government policy in Australia or war overseas. And I think all of those things in their own way can be really limiting. So I'd be interested to hear from you around how you think Australians could be speaking about refugees and people seeking asylum and what kind of language we could be using. Alyas?
Look, most of the information, as you mentioned, I casually drive Uber, and I meet a lot of Australians. The narrative and the information and the idea of who refugees, people from refugee backgrounds are and people seeking asylum are, come from the media, and most of the people I meet get in a way confronted that they've met someone from Afghanistan who was refugee once. And in the 10-minute strip, 15-minute strip, they put a lot of questions on me to get that confusion away from, you know, what the fact is. I think the media is misguiding. I mean, who controls the media? It's not only bad for the narrative of of refugees, the language that the media is using. It's bad for women who are victim of domestic violence. It's bad for, you know, people from diverse sexuality and genders, you know, LGBTQ plus community. It's pathetic in terms of the environment that they're using. So the question I ask people who have this narrative of refugees and people seeking asylum is that, where did you get that information from? Have you ever met a refugee yourself? Have you known a refugee or a person seeking asylum yourself? If not, then your narrative is imposed on you. You actually don't know the fact. And most Australians are told that refugees and people seeking asylums are a concern to them. It is not actually, if they've not met one, if they've not been harmed by one. As I said earlier, the politics of identity and division is really you know, bad within Australian politics, and often I ask Australians, what do you mean by Australian? How do you define someone who is Australian? And people get confused and they mumble and they're like, oh, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about it, you know. You're told you're Australian, but who is Australian? An Australian is someone who speaks English, but not every Australian speaks English. A lot of indigenous people don't. Yeah. Okay, fine. Is Australian being white? Is Australian being black? Is Australian? I mean, that's interesting. But I think as advocates and in a way activists, we can change things bit by bit. One conversation at a time can change the narrative. One individual at a time can, if you can just ignite a question in their mind or a doubt that the narrative given to them is not based on reality and fact, then I think people will understand that there is a lot of misinformation about refugees and people seeking asylum within the media and political debate. They cash out, the politicians actually cash out this division and hate, and Australians don't know about that. They should know that when the division and hate is created within them, they can be exploited easier. If they are given a foreign enemy, it's easier for them to be manipulated. And I think it is one conversation at a time.
One of the things that I really want people in Australia to know is that seeking safety is a human right. It's actually under the Declaration of Human Rights to seek safety. And if we all think of a moment just recently in Australia where there was the bushfires, and we saw in the news families actually getting on boats to seek safety and seek cover for their family. People were putting their children on boats because it was safer to put them on boats in the water than to keep them on land. The enemy may have been different, the danger, but it was still people escaping for safety of their life. That's what we need to think about when people are forced to flee their home country. Think of that moment where you saw in Australia people having to put their families on boats to keep them safe. There are over 70 million people currently forcibly displaced worldwide, and less than 1% of that actually get to go to a country of resettlement like Australia. And actually, the percentage of how many Australians take, if it's less than 1% get to go to a country of resettlement, it's like a drop in the ocean of the figure of how many people are currently displaced worldwide, seeking safety, seeking a better place for their families to live, to just live.
Alyas, you had another different way of talking about refugees as well.
Look, as I mentioned before, I think forced migration is human right abuse and an act of violence. Seeking protection, as Sarvari says, being a refugee and walking away from violence is an act of being a peacemaker. You actually try to contribute to the international peace, and people from refugee background and people seeking asylum should be celebrated because they're the genuine peacemaker internationally, and each of them walking away from violence and not taking part in that is contributing to the international peace. And my message to the Australians, everyday Australian, is that when you meet a refugee, when you meet a person from refugee background and a person seeking asylum, you should celebrate. You should hug them and be friend with them, and explode with joy because they're wonderful people.
So for people who are watching this who maybe feel unsure about what they can do, could you maybe share a moment or something that maybe the way that someone responded to you, or just a moment that may have happened for you that helped you to feel a sense of belonging or welcome or inclusion here, that might help others to think about how they can be part of creating that for new arrivals? Alyas?
Well, I think as compared to the population of Australia, refugees and people seeking asylum are really less in number. So not every Australian can get the opportunity to be friend with them or to know someone from refugee background. But if you do, if you come across somebody, just be their friends. If they're your neighbor, if they're your colleague working with you, if you meet them at social events, or you can be friend with them. I mean, that's the best thing you can do, because then you would have the opportunity to know more about people who have come here for safety. Otherwise, be part of the movement, be part of the campaigns that is being run by different wonderful organizations and groups throughout Australia. Be a volunteer. If you're passionate about helping refugees, do anything you can.
Yeah, I really like that answer of, actually learn, get to know someone who is from a refugee background, get to know their story. They're people just like you and me. A lot of people might look at me and not know that I have a refugee background. But once you get to know people and have a conversation and just, ask about the background, you start to get to know people. I also think it's really important for people to feel like they belong. I think that's another thing that's really human nature for everybody. We grow up in our teen years, and what do we want to do? We want to belong. And that's the same thing for people who come from other countries. They want to feel a sense of belonging. So think about what makes you feel that you belong and share that with someone who is from a refugee background or a new migrant.
For me, I compare my situation coming 31 years ago as a refugee and compared to today's refugees, it's very sad. I was privileged. Australia was open for me in every single way. I never had that fear of saying I was a refugee. And today, unfortunately, what I feel, and it made me very sad, is people are coming to Australia as a refugee, and on top of them, they got a stigma, they're dangerous. Don't approach them. They're coming to take everything. They're coming with the religion or whatever. And that made me feel very upset, because I came 31 years ago as a refugee and I had everything. These people coming for the same reasons like me, and they don't have the opportunities I had. So for me, I will send the message, break the cycle. We are humans. We all refugees. We are living in an Aboriginal country. Whoever comes 100 years ago, 2 months ago, in aeroplane, on a boat, we are all refugees in this country. And we all building up this country somehow. I came without English. Now I can speak. I didn't have a job. Now I have a job. As he said, we are coming in peace. We're not coming to destroy this country. If this country was open to us somehow, we don't want to destroy, we want to build. We want to be part of the society. And the only way I think we have to teach the young generation to break the cycle. Are you yellow? Are you black? But inside my skin, under my skin, all the same. So, and be free. Let that go. As Liliana said, it's so nice to share food, to share culture, to share language, to share colors. This is Australia, colors. So break the cycle. Young people, break the cycle.
For me, I think let's make Australia the best refuge space that we can give to others. I mean, with refugees coming in or giving refuge to beings that come in the land, I think the land will prosper from that. If you look in the histories of any land, those who have given refuge to the others, they have only prospered. And they have gained knowledge from the beings who have come into the land. And so I think let's make Australia the best refuge space, not only for the human beings, also for all the beings. Yeah.
What a note to end on. Tenzin Choegyal, Marcela, Cornejo, Liliana Maria, Alyas Taqawi, thank you so much for being part of such a rich and thoughtful conversation. This has been a special panel version of In My Country for REIMAGINE. If you'd like to hear more from our guests today, they each feature in their own episode in the podcast and speak about their experiences and stories in more detail. And we also interview 2 other guests as well. And you can stay in touch via social media. We'd like to say a really special thank you to Multicultural Australia for inviting us to be part of this festival, and we really appreciate the opportunity to be part of the conversation. We will be leaving you today with a special performance from the magical Tenzin Choegyal.
Okay, greetings to everyone. And I'll do a song called Agutada, meaning the uncle horseman. So you all, those of you all listening here are the uncle horsemen. And you can support anyone that are lost around by giving your horsepower to them. Thank you.